Hey everyone, this is Vanessa Chase-Lokshin from storytellingnonprofit.com, back here for another video today, and I wanted to talk about a subject that I feel like I often mention in webinars or blog posts, but I haven't really delved into too much with you guys, so I thought I would do a more in-depth video today on that. And that topic is how to run a donor survey. Donor surveys are such an important tool, and I want to talk a little bit about why that is, and then also talk about the logistics of how do you actually go from putting together that survey to executing it so that you can get some really viable and good results from it. And I'll show you a couple of examples as well. So just a little bit of background if you're thinking about this or maybe new to the concept of audience or donor surveys. One of the things I often find myself telling people is that knowing your audience is such essential information to storytelling, to fundraising, to communications, whatever it is that your goal is under one of those umbrellas, knowing your audience is that key foundation that is going to help you really meet that goal. I often hear from people, that they don't feel like their communications are resonating with donors or something just isn't quite working. And I always say, go back to what you know and think about what that essential information is that you know about your audience for sure. And think about, based on what you put out there already, would this actually resonate with them? Where have you maybe not met the mark, or where could you make some improvements for next time? These are things that are all very useful to you as a communicator or a fundraiser. So one of the best ways, though, to gather information is through a survey. And I'm going to use the term donor survey today because I know a lot of you do fundraising. This is probably the context in which you'll be doing the survey. But I want to say, if you're not a fundraiser and you have another role at your nonprofit, maybe you do more general communications and marketing, audience surveys. Also, you can just kind of replace that term and use the term audience survey for yourself. It's the same concept, and you can go through that same process for that. Now, I will say there are lots of ways to gather information about your audience depending on what kind of channels you're looking at, but there's things like Google Analytics, Facebook Insights, all of those things can be really useful. But I have to say that donor surveys offer something that those do not offer you, and that is really qualitative information about your audience. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference between qualitative and quantitative information that we gather in this kind of data process. So let's get into the actual how-to of this, and I'm going to walk you through a number of steps for this and talk about each one here in the next few minutes. So whenever I start working on a survey with a client, one of the first things we talk about is identifying an objective. I think this is so important because if you don't have a clear objective in mind around why you're running the survey, sometimes you tend to get a little lost in the process, or you don't really have the ability to ask great questions. And it sort of becomes this mishmash of information that's kind of useful, but when you go back to the analyzing and analytics part of the survey data, you realize you didn't quite get what you were looking for. So how do you pick an objective? There's a couple of things you can think about here. One, and this is, I think, is always a great one, is to think about what your current assumptions are about your audience. So what do you assume you know about them? And what are kind of your operating assumptions? And the best way to think about this is, maybe you assume right now that all of your donors are over the age of 65 and love direct mail. But I would ask you, do you have any data that actually speaks to that and proves that that's not just an assumption, that it's actually a fact? I guarantee that there's a lot of assumptions that you make about your audience that are really impacting how you're running your fundraising program, and testing those in a survey can be a really great idea. You can also think more about questions, like a broad question that you have. Maybe you want to understand why people support your organization as opposed to others. Maybe you want to understand how effective your communications are. Maybe you want to understand, let's see what else. There's so many different things. You could also think about, understanding what it is that people love so much about your work or your mission, why they're attracted to your organization. These can all be types of objectives that you can have. The key thing that I want to communicate here to you, though, is to pick one and use that as a guiding kind of principle throughout your survey process. So once you've got your objective in place, the next thing you'll need to do is think about how you're actually going to facilitate this survey. Now, there are lots of ways that you can do this, and I'll leave some links here below this video so that you can check out a few different ones. I personally use Google Forms. That's one of my favorite survey tools. You could also use things like FormStack or SurveyMonkey. These are all relatively free tools that you can use. You can often embed them directly on your website. They'll allow you to create a fairly custom survey form that will reflect your organization's brand and allow you to kind of put in the questions that you want to put in. Great thing about a lot of these tools, they often have analytics behind them or a way to kind of capture all of that data in a nice spreadsheet for you, which is super helpful at the end of this process. So certainly a benefit. Now, that's really great, of course, if you're looking at targeting an online audience, for instance, but let's say you don't necessarily have a huge online following and you would rather talk to people who give to you in offline channels. You can absolutely send a survey in the mail. And your tools would be a little different. You would need certainly to set up that survey using something like Microsoft Word or some other word processor. You need to print it, you need to mail it. You would also need a mailing list so you know who you're sending that survey out to. So there's a little bit more, I think, logistics involved when you're doing a mail out survey, but totally doable. And I would just encourage you to think about what those tools are that you're going to use. And that allows you to kind of move into the third step of this, which is to develop kind of a marketing plan for your survey. Now, this might seem like a strange thing to include here, and I know I haven't even talked about the questions yet, but I'm going to get to that soon. And I haven't talked about them yet because I feel like there's all these foundational steps that are really important to being able to run a highly successful survey for your donors. So the third step that I want to suggest is to develop a marketing plan, or some kind of plan more broadly. When we send out direct mail appeals or we're running a campaign or an appeal or anything like that, we often have a plan in place to make sure that our message gets across to people and we're able to really meet our goals for fundraising or communications, whatever that might be. I want to suggest that the same thing is important for a survey because sometimes people need to be reminded more than once to give. Similarly, they're going to be needed reminded more than once to take the survey so that you get a good response rate. So it's important to think about having kind of a follow-up plan in place. If you sent that survey out by email, will you send a follow-up reminder email to people? If you've sent out in the mail, will you make some phone calls after you've sent it out to encourage people to respond? What are those kind of follow-up tactics that you're going to use to really increase your response rate to the survey? All good things to think about. In terms of an actual timeline for this plan, I would encourage you to set aside 2, maybe 3 weeks to kind of get this completed and to get that survey taken care of. As I'm sure you probably know from fundraising work, people respond to deadlines and to urgencies. So if you tell people they have an indefinite amount of time to fill out this survey, there's less incentive there for them. So it's good to kind of put a deadline on that and try to, again, increase that response rate. All right, so that brings us to actually developing the content of our survey. So we've done all of this important groundwork to get ready for this, which is really one of the most important parts, because if you don't ask good questions, you're often not going to get good results. So people often ask me, how many questions should we include? What kinds of questions should we include? What should we not ask? All of these things. There's so many good things to think about in your survey. So I'll give you a couple of kind of guiding principles that I have for when I work on surveys and things that I teach people in some of my classes. So I often aim for 5 to 10 questions total. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, that is not enough questions for us. I want to tell you it definitely is. So if you go back to your objective, you only want to ask questions ideally that help you meet your learning objective for this survey. The other thing is too, is if you start to creep over the 10 question mark, your survey is getting really, really long and people are not going to complete it, and you want people to complete it. You want to encourage them that there's a level of ease to taking this survey, that it's not going to take them very long. They can quickly do it. It's going to be really easy, fast, all of those things. So that's why it's important to kind of keep the questions in check. Now, in terms of what kinds of questions you should ask, I like to encourage people to ask a mix of both open-ended questions and also questions that are kind of multiple choice or that people can pick an answer to. You can kind of categorize these as qualitative versus quantitative questions, which I talked a little bit about a few minutes ago, and I'll show you an example in an actual survey here in a few slides. So open-ended questions are great because they actually give you the language and the words that your audience uses, which is hugely beneficial to you as a communicator. A good example of an open-ended question might be something like, why do you give to our organization? Now, another type of question is more of a quantitative question, and that's where people might be selecting an answer, kind of multiple choice option, that sort of thing. And it might be something like, of our programs and services, which do you most enjoy giving to? And then maybe you'd have a couple of different options that people could select. That's an example of a quantitative question. The other kinds of questions you can think about asking here are demographic and psychographic questions. Now, demographic questions are more about people's kind of demographic information. So their age range, their household income, where they live, what they do for a living, all of those things, which are really useful for you as you kind of create a composite picture of who this audience is. Psychographic questions, on the other hand, really get to the heart of people's beliefs, their value systems. And I have to say, in storytelling, this is one of the things that we want to be able to reflect. So understanding what those are can be hugely important. Now, once you've got those questions in place, it's great to think about executing your plan. So it's really quite simple. You kind of go back to that plan that you created in step 3 and roll things out. And if you're kind of coming up against some barriers, if you're finding you're not getting the results you want, or rather you're not getting the kind of response rate you want, use this first survey as a test. See what went wrong, see what things you could do differently, and then move forward and move into another survey later on this year. I'll give you a bonus tip. You do have to analyze your results. So once you get those results in, make sure you take some time to actually go through and look at all of the results that you got. Follow up with donors who gave you some interesting answers or things that you want to have clarified. This is a big learning opportunity for you, so don't let that go to the wayside. Don't let the results just kind of sit in an Excel file somewhere for years. You put all this work into and then you're not actually making good use out of. All right, so I want to give you a couple of examples of kind of emails and kind of collateral that goes along with the actual survey, as well as the survey itself. So one of the things that we need to send out, of course, is emails to tell people to take this survey if you're doing it online. So I want to give you a couple of examples of this, what this could look like. This is an email that I got from Mercy Corps, maybe it must have been 2 years ago, since it says the 2015 supporter survey. So this is a short email that they sent. This was a second or third email that they sent reminding people to take their survey. You can see it's really obvious where the hyperlinks are to get to that survey, which is important. And the highlighted text also says, take our survey now. There's the call to action, really obviously pointed out for people in this email. One of the other things that I think is really nice about this is here in the third paragraph, it says, quote, so far I've learned that 49% of our supporters who've taken the survey are most passionate about meeting people's needs for basic needs for food and water. What do you think? Take our survey and let us know. So they've used some of the data that they've already gotten. They've reported back on it and said, this is what other people think. How do you kind of stack up to this? I think it's a really good kind of use of information and kind of peer support or peer data to encourage people to share their opinion as well. So I'll give you another example of a survey that came out. I think this was probably also 2015 as well. And this one's from the New Organizing Institute, which is now part of Wellstone Action. So you can see, again, pretty short email asking people to take this survey. But I think that one of the things they do really well, again, is making the links to the survey really obvious. They give people reasons as to why it's important to take this survey. They talk about how they're about to go into a strategic planning meeting and they really want people's opinions and inputs to be able to build out this plan for the year. I have to say, one of the things I love about this email that I think is just kind of a nice personality point is their PS. They sent a lot of emails as an organization. And so their PS says, like, love, or just feel meh about our emails, tell us. I think it's a really kind of cute and kind of fun way to add a PS and some personality into the email itself. All right, so let's actually look at an example of a survey. And let's see, I'm not sure the questions on this are totally clear, so I'll read them out as we go. This one is from Union Gospel Mission here in Vancouver. And this is a survey from a couple of years ago. You'll see that there's a couple of things in the survey that work really well, and I'll point those out as we go. One of the things is the fact that there's a nice image, a nice header image up at the top, and they've also given people a little bit of context in those first 2 paragraphs before the first question. What the survey is about. So it says, your input is essential as UGM moves forward to meet the growing needs of our community. We value you as a collaborative partner and we want to thank you for taking the time to complete our survey. All responses are confidential and personal information will not be shared with anyone or any other organization. General results will be made public. So I think that that's a really good thing to include in the survey page itself, just to give people some confidence as to the fact that they can count on this being a confidential survey. And it just gives some nice context for getting people started. So a couple of questions they start with. First, they said, including UGM, how many charities do you support financially? There's a couple of options, 1, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, or more than 5. There's also some options for checkboxes in the next question, which says, what inspires you to give to UGM? So there's some different answers there, which really helps them to kind of determine where people are coming from with their desire to give. A couple other questions here. So question 3, I felt thanked and appreciated after my last gift to UGM. So you can see strongly agree, agree, disagree, strongly disagree. So this question is really great, and I think it gets to the heart of one of their objectives for this survey, which is really understanding the effectiveness of their donor survey, or their donor stewardship rather, which is what this question is really trying to ascertain. They follow up with an open-ended question asking, in your opinion, what could we do better with regards to stewardship? And in the fourth question, they ask, how do you like to donate to UGM and other charities? So again, trying to understand donors' preferences so that they can be really donor-centered in the work that they're doing. A couple more questions just in this survey. So question 5, do you enjoy reading our stories and updates? And then question 6, what UGM programs interest you the most? And then there are 2 demographic questions down at the bottom, one about age range and one about household income. Now, I know some of you might think, oh my gosh, are we allowed to ask how much money people make? Yes, you can absolutely ask if that's something that you feel is important to your organization. Maybe you're trying to do some prospecting or understanding the wealth or capacity of your donors. Great question to ask. I'll also say that you should make all of these questions optional. So if people don't feel comfortable disclosing information like this in a survey, they're under no obligation to. That's always a good thing to be able to give them. So this is an example of one survey. There are lots of others that you can find online. I'm sure if you Google nonprofit surveys, you can probably come up with a couple of examples. If you're interested or looking for some others, feel free to send me an email. I can also point you in the direction of some different surveys that I've seen over the years and also ones that I have worked on. So I want to say, though, before we wrap up this quick video, is that surveys are really just the tipping point for effective storytelling. I think that they are really, though, the bedrock of being able to tell a story that resonates with your audience and a story that really helps you to raise money and awareness. And I want to invite you to check out a class that I'm going to be teaching here in a couple of weeks. We're opening up registration very soon on February 21st, in fact, and it's called the Storytelling Nonprofit Masterclass. It's a 6-week online class that I teach that'll help you really understand how to tell effective nonprofit stories. And if you've enjoyed this lesson on how to run a donor survey, we cover topics like this in much more depth in the class itself. So you can find out more information over at thestorytellingnonprofit.com/master.class. And I just want to say thank you for watching this video today. I hope it's been helpful as you've been thinking about how to run your own donor surveys. And if you have questions or want to connect with me about anything you heard in today's video, feel free to send me an email. My email address is here on the slide, Vanessa@thestorytellingnonprofit.com.